I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. The coffee shop was quiet that Tuesday morning, the kind of slow hum that settles in just after the breakfast rush and before the lunchtime crowd. I sat at the corner table by the window, the one with the cracked vinyl seat that squeaked when you shifted your weight. My usual, black coffee, no sugar, the way I always ordered but never really cared about. She was behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine with deliberate care, her hands steady but worn like she'd been doing this a long time. When she glanced up, our eyes caught for a brief second, just enough time for me to notice the faint crease at the corner of her mouth, the kind that wasn't quite a smile, but not quite anything else either. "Hey, Jake," she said, and my heart tripped over itself. I hadn't told her my name. Not exactly. I blinked, wondering if I'd misheard, but there it was again. "You mean, how do you?" She shrugged, wiping a spot on the counter. "You're the guy from the apartment upstairs. You come in here every Tuesday." Her voice was calm, unforced, like this was nothing special, but everything felt like it. I nodded, looking down at my hands folded on the table. I could feel a little heat creeping up my neck, but I didn't say anything. She brought the cup over without a word, placing it gently in front of me. Same as usual. That simple phrase made the air between us heavier than it needed to be. I watched her walk away, the faint click of her heels against the floor, and I realized how often I'd noticed her before without really seeing her. The way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the tired slump in her shoulders after a long day. I had a habit of drafting texts in my head, but never sending them. Little things I wanted to say, or maybe just to reach out and say something. Anything. That felt less like loneliness and more like connection. My phone sat face down on the table, the screen dark, untouched. She returned, this time leaning on the counter with a quiet confidence that made my throat tighten. "You seem different today." I tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out too soft, like a question instead of an answer. "Yeah, maybe," I said. She tilted her head, eyes flicking toward my hands, then back up. "You know, I used to think this place was just a stop on my way home. Now, it's the best part of my day." That caught me off guard. I wanted to ask why, but I didn't. Instead, I just watched her, the way the morning light caught the silver at her temples, the quiet strength beneath her calm. She looked at me for a long moment, as if deciding something important. Then, almost as an afterthought, she said, "You make me feel alive again." The words hung there, awkward and beautiful. I wanted to say the right thing, but only managed. "Then don't stop." We both laughed, a little too quickly, like we were startled by the honesty of it. She glanced at her watch. "I should get going." I stood up, suddenly unsure of what to do with my hands. The usual goodbye felt too small for the space between us. She smiled, a real one this time, and said, "See you next Tuesday, Jake." I nodded, heart racing as she walked out the door, leaving a faint scent of jasmine and something I couldn't quite place. Back at the table, my phone buzzed with a new message. "Coffee again tomorrow? I want to see if you really mean it." I stared at the screen, caught between hesitation and something like hope. Maybe this was just the start of something that wouldn't make sense on paper, but felt real in the quiet spaces between words. The next morning, the coffee shop felt different, like it was holding its breath along with me. I showed up a few minutes early, running a hand through my hair, trying to settle the knot of nerves in my stomach. She was already there, setting out fresh pastries on the display case, her movements slow and careful, like she was performing a small ritual. When she looked up and caught my eye, that same crease softened her face. "Morning, Jake," she said, voice low. "Morning," I replied, hoping I didn't sound as awkward as I felt. She poured us both tea this time, the kind with chamomile and a faint hint of something sweet. We sat at the same corner table, the one by the window where light pooled like a quiet witness. For a while, we just sipped in silence. I watched her fingers curl around the warm cup, the way she seemed almost distant, like she was somewhere else inside her own thoughts. Finally, she broke the quiet. "You ever think about how some moments stick, even when they shouldn't?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, like little cracks in time you can't quite explain." She smiled, but it was fragile, almost like a secret. "When I was younger, my daughter and I used to come here every Saturday. She loved the cinnamon rolls. Her eyes flicked down, a shadow crossing her face. She's grown now. College. Far away. The weight of that caught in my chest. I realized then why this felt complicated. She was my friend's mom. Someone I wasn't supposed to notice this much, let alone want to be around. I swallowed, fighting the urge to say something stupid. Instead, I reached out to steady a teacup that threatened to tip over. The small gesture felt louder than intended. I get it, I said quietly. I'm not great at staying connected either. Lot of half-written texts that never get sent. She looked up, eyes softening. Lonely in a crowded world. That phrase settled between us, a shared truth neither had to say aloud. For a moment, the noise of the coffee shop dimmed, replaced by the quiet pulse of something unspoken. I wanted to reach out, to close the distance that wasn't just about the table between us, but something more tangled. Age, circumstance, the invisible lines we both seemed careful not to cross. Instead, I made a joke, weak but sincere. Maybe that's why I keep coming back. You make the silence less loud. She laughed, low and warm, and for a second, her hand brushed mine as she reached for her cup. The touch was fleeting but charged, a question without words. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. She hesitated when I reached for her hand again, pulling back just enough to leave a breath of space between us. The quiet tension felt thicker, like the air before a storm, but no thunder. "Hey, Jake," came a voice from the door, my friend, Liam, stepping in with his usual easy grin that didn't quite reach his eyes this morning. I stiffened, and she straightened too, smoothing her blouse like it mattered. "Didn't expect to see you here," Liam said, scanning the room, then landing on us. There was a pause, long enough for the silence to stretch. She offered a small, polite smile, but didn't say much. I caught her glance flicker toward the clock, then back to me, an unspoken signal I couldn't ignore. I cleared my throat, trying to shift the mood, but my voice felt uneven. "Just catching up." Liam nodded, eyes still curious, but he didn't press. He grabbed his usual black coffee, glanced at us once more, then turned away. After he left, the warmth between us seemed to cool, replaced by a cautious quiet. She looked down, fingers twisting the napkin in her lap, the way someone does when they're trying to hold back. "I should get going soon," she said softly, almost a whisper. I wanted to say wait, but the words tangled inside me. Instead, I reached up, brushing a stray hair behind her ear, a gesture half hopeful, half afraid. Her breath caught. Our eyes locked, holding a fragile question neither dared voice. For a moment, the world shrank to just us, the space charged with everything left unsaid. And then, just before anything could happen, she pulled back again, just enough to keep the line between us intact. I wanted to cross it, wanted to see what might be there. But instead, I just said, "See you next Tuesday." Her smile was sad and soft. "See you then." And the moment passed, quiet, heavy, unresolved. We ended up walking after work, the streets quiet except for the soft rustle of leaves underfoot. The city had that late summer coolness, the kind that presses gently on your skin and makes everything feel a little sharper, a little more real. She didn't say much, just kept her hands tucked in her coat pockets, eyes fixed on the cracks in the sidewalk. I could feel her holding something back, the way her steps slowed, then sped up again, like she was trying to outrun the thought. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. Then she stopped, near a bench, and turned to look at me. Her breath was steady, but her eyes flickered. There was something raw behind them. "I don't know how to say this," she began, voice low and uneven, like she was balancing on the edge of something. "I shouldn't feel this way. It's complicated." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, urging her with my silence to keep going. She took a deep breath. "It's jealousy, I guess. Seeing you with your friends, laughing, being young without a care. I hate that it gets to me." Her gaze dropped, hands tightening into fists. "I'm not supposed to want more than just this. A simple friendship." I reached out, but stopped halfway, unsure if she wanted the comfort or the space. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm just fooling myself," she said, voice cracking slightly. "If this, us, is just a moment I'm chasing because I'm scared of being alone. The silence stretched, heavy and fragile. I wanted to say everything. To tell her she wasn't alone. To tell her I felt the same. But the words tangled inside me, messy and incomplete. Instead, I whispered, "What if it's not just a moment?" Her eyes met mine, wide and searching. And then she asked, without really asking, "What happens if it is?" She stopped coming to the coffee shop on Tuesdays. At first, I thought maybe she was just busy. Life had a way of doing that, after all. But the next week, then the next, the corner table stayed empty, and the chamomile tea sat untouched in my memory. I waited, watching the door every time it swung open, hoping for that familiar crease in her smile, the quiet way she'd say, "Jake." But she didn't come. When I tried calling, the line went straight to voicemail. A message left unsaid, like a half-finished conversation dangling in the air. I learned later, through a quiet mention from a mutual friend, that her ex had come back into town. Something about a child, a custody battle, pieces of a past she hadn't shared with me. I wanted to ask her why she hadn't said anything. Wanted to tell her I didn't care about the complications, only about her. But I stayed silent. Some nights, I'd imagine what might have been, what could still be, before shaking it off like a bad dream. Other times, I felt the sharp sting of confusion, the ache of waiting without knowing. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. The chair across from me remains empty. She was standing in the doorway of the apartment, the evening light fading behind her like a slow sigh. I'd been pacing inside, trying to untangle the mess of everything we hadn't said, every look and half-word that had piled up between us. I wanted to ask her to stay, to make it easier than it felt. But the weight of all the what-ifs sat heavy on my chest, making the words stick like glue. Instead, I leaned against the doorframe, hands shoved deep in my pockets, and waited. She didn't rush to speak either. Her eyes traced the lines on the floor, then flicked up to meet mine with something quiet and raw. "I'm scared," she finally said, voice soft, not because she wanted sympathy, but because she needed it to be real. "Scared that if I try, I'll lose more than I'm ready to lose." I nodded, the truth settling in like a slow ache. "So maybe this is just where we stop," she added, a pause hanging between the words like fragile glass. I didn't have an answer that could fix it, only a quiet hope. "Okay," I said, and it wasn't surrender. It was something harder, acceptance. She smiled then, small and real, and reached out to rest her hand lightly on my arm. No promises, no big declarations. Just a moment where two people, broken and cautious, found a kind of peace. Months passed. The corner table by the window stayed ours most mornings, the cracked vinyl seat still creaking under familiar weight. She poured the chamomile tea sometimes, but more often I got the black coffee just right. No sugar, no fuss. Our conversations weren't dramatic or urgent. They were quiet exchanges, notes slipped in between daily routines, half smiles over shared breakfasts, and pauses that said everything without words. One chilly morning, around 8:47, we sat on the bench outside the coffee shop, watching the city wake up. She pulled her coat tighter, and I handed her my scarf. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of unspoken understanding. The way two people grow into each other not with fireworks, but with small acts that build something steady. I glanced at her and saw the same tired strength I'd noticed that first day, softened now by a kind of peace. I didn't need to say it out loud. The story we'd lived was in the silence between us, in the way her hand found mine just long enough to remind me that here, finally, was something real. And maybe that was enough. Only we would know.